November the 11th, 2024. Birmingham's Arrivals Hall. 6 ordinary-looking suitcases slid onto the baggage belt. To fellow passengers, they were just more luggage returning from a long-haul flight. But hidden inside was something far darker. 180 kilos of pure coke, a shipment worth millions once it hit the streets. Investigators were stunned not only by the sheer scale of the haul, but by the identity of the person who arrived to claim it. Not cartel enforcers, not hardened smugglers, but a mother from Bradford, a 54-year-old grandmother named Farzana Kauser. And beside her, the couriers she relied on most, her own children. Teenagers pushing trolleys, sons and daughters lifting heavy cases. Even a daughter-in-law was drawn into the scheme. On the surface, they were just a family returning from a short weekend trip. In reality, they were the final link in one of Britain's most audacious smuggling operations. That evening in November, Kauser arrived at the airport looking like a worried parent waiting for her children. She even told officers she was just here to collect them. Minutes later, 6 suitcases were unzipped, exposing tightly wrapped blocks of illegal substances. In that instant, the devoted mother mask shattered, revealing months of using her children as pawns in an international pipeline. What came next stunned the country. A meticulous scheme that worked again and again. A mother at the centre of it all, directing her children like pieces on a chessboard, convinced she had found a foolproof way to outsmart the system. But that night at the Birmingham terminal was only the ending of the story. To understand why this case shocked Britain, we need to step back into a quiet Bradford street where nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Let's uncover a loving mum with a double life. To her neighbours on Waterlily Road in Manningham, Farzana Kauser looked like any other middle-aged mum. She raised her children, kept to herself, and blended into the rhythms of suburban life. A senior NCA investigating officer, Rick Mackenzie, said her friends described her as thoughtful, loving, and very normal. But Mackenzie later exposed a very different picture. Behind closed doors, Kauser was, in their words, well practiced in her life as a high-end cocaine trafficker. She took extreme care to cover her tracks, deleting evidence and disguising her movements. What made the case chilling was not just the scale of the operation, but the way she ran it. Kauser emerged as the linchpin of the UK side of an international crime group, far more than a mere participant, and she did not recruit strangers or outsiders. She turned inward, pulling her own family into the conspiracy. 5 of her children became couriers under her command. Some were already adults, but 2 were still teenagers, barely old enough to vote, yet already risking years in prison for their mother's scheme. Instead of protecting them, she pushed them into organized crime, telling them when to fly, what to say, and which bags to lift. Reporters later dubbed it "Mum's the word" for the crimes committed in this family. It captured the surreal truth. A mother turned her household into a smuggling gang, moving millions in controlled substances under the guise of family trips. And this raises a question that sits at the heart of the story. How does an ordinary mother convince her children to join her in crime? The answer lies in the method she perfected, a smuggling trick so bold it seemed watertight on paper, until the night it collapsed. So how did a mother in Bradford manage to move millions of pounds worth of controlled substances across borders without anyone noticing? The answer lies in a plan. Sarah Ingram from the Crown Prosecution Service called it a sophisticated and well-planned operation to flood the UK with high-purity cocaine worth millions. First, who supplied the narcotics? Kauser kept her distance from the source. Instead, she depended on facilitators abroad, contacts who handled the supply at its origin. At the centre was a mysterious figure in Pakistan known only as Uncle. He coordinated logistics while coke was packaged into suitcases in Mexico. Those bags weren't checked in by passengers. They were placed on planes by a corrupt, complicit staffer at Cancun International Airport. To everyone else, they looked like normal, unaccompanied bags on a UK-bound flight. Why Cancun? Likely because of its established cartel supply lines and the ease of slipping compromised luggage into outgoing flights. For the traffickers, it was the perfect launch pad. How did the drugs pass British controls? Here the plan turned chillingly clever. From August to November 2024, her children made at least 5 runs using the same formula. They booked short trips to Dublin or Amsterdam, 1 or 2 nights at most. No checked luggage. To staff, they looked like casual weekenders or business travellers, but the timing of their return flights was no coincidence. Each arrival was scheduled to land in Birmingham just as the Cancun flight was unloading. And here's the trick. Instead of heading to their assigned claim area, they moved straight to the Cancun belt. Waiting there were the exact suitcases they'd been told to collect. With no outbound luggage of their own, they simply picked up the narcotics-packed cases and walked out as if nothing was wrong. The trick relied on a blind spot. People rarely challenge someone lifting a bag at baggage claim. It banked on that same blind spot. No one questions a young traveller collecting a bag, especially with a parent nearby. For a while it worked. Trip after trip, the family carried bags of illegal substances out of Birmingham without raising alarms. It looked seamless. It looked airtight. But there's no such thing as a foolproof crime. And with every run, Kauser's family was digging itself deeper into the crosshairs of investigators who were already closing in. So what was the secret at the heart of Farzana's plot? It came down to timing. Her children booked their return flights so they would land in Birmingham at the exact moment flights from Cancun were arriving. What looked like a coincidence was in fact the linchpin of the operation. When they stepped off their short-haul planes, they carried no luggage of their own. Instead of walking to the carousel for their Dublin or Amsterdam flight, they went straight to the Cancun belt. Blending in with genuine passengers, they waited for the suitcases packed with coke. But how did they know which ones to grab? Before each trip, the conspirators were sent photographs of the exact bags. When those bags rolled out, Kauser's sons and daughters simply picked them up, 30 kilos at a time, and wheeled them out as if they belonged to them. The frightening part was that their tickets weren't linked to those bags, so there was no record of them being tied to the suitcases. They were gambling that officials wouldn't notice the mismatch. And for a while, they were right. Investigators say the family pulled off this luggage swap at least 4 times without raising suspicion. What happened next? Once outside, the coke was quickly moved. Some of it went straight to a courier from another crime group. The rest went 120 miles north to Bradford, hidden in Kauser's home on Waterlily Road, then passed down the chain. The group believed they had discovered a straightforward method. They exploited the blind spot between flight arrivals and baggage claim, and for several months they smuggled illegal substances with apparent ease. By November 2024, investigators estimate they had already imported around 180 kilos of high-purity controlled substances, worth nearly £5 million wholesale and as much as £14.4 million once cut and sold on the streets. Beneath the guise of a family errand lay a conduit feeding a global pipeline. Family members act as couriers. A shadowy uncle in Pakistan pulls strings. Corrupt baggage handlers in Mexico and cartel suppliers feed the chain. All of it is orchestrated by a mother in Bradford, hiding in plain sight. The airport bust, November the 11th, 2024. Every criminal enterprise, no matter how carefully constructed, lives with one truth. It takes only one mistake for the facade to collapse. For months, Kauser's scheme had worked with mechanical precision, but on the evening of the 11th of November 2024, the system she thought was infallible finally snapped. This was the 5th run. 5 trips in as many months, each one feeding the illusion that the family had found the perfect loophole. But investigators from the National Crime Agency had already begun to join the dots: travel records, passenger manifests, and whispers from abroad. Whether through Mexican cooperation, intelligence sharing, or sharp-eyed pattern spotting, the NCA knew what to expect this time. The question wasn't if the traffickers would appear at Birmingham's terminal, it was when. And finally, the setup was too close this time. 6 members of Kauser's network had boarded a short-haul holiday flight, tickets booked under the guise of quick getaways. No checked baggage, no signs of excess luggage on departure. To anyone watching casually, they looked like weekend travellers returning home. But their timing was no coincidence. Their return was scheduled to land minutes after a Cancun flight touched down. And as they stepped off the plane into the fluorescent-lit arrivals hall, they didn't join the trickle of Dublin or Amsterdam passengers heading to their assigned belt. They moved with purpose, heading straight toward the Cancun luggage conveyor. What they didn't know was that they weren't alone. Hidden in the crowd, undercover NCA agents and Border Force officers were already in position. Surveillance teams had been briefed. The Cancun flight was being watched like a hawk. Every suitcase sliding off that belt could be the one. One by one, the passengers from Cancun reclaimed their luggage. Tired holidaymakers, families with beach bags, couples rolling oversized cases. Amid them, Kauser's children and associates blended in, eyes trained on the photos they'd been sent before boarding. And then they saw them, the pre-identified suitcases. Each bag was packed with controlled substances, roughly 30 kilograms apiece. They looked like ordinary luggage, indistinguishable from the rest. But to Kauser's crew, these were the prize. Casually, almost lazily, they lifted the bags from the carousel. No fuss, no hesitation. Years of routine told bystanders that this was nothing unusual. But for investigators, it was the confirmation they had been waiting for. The conspirators turned toward the exit, wheeling the narco-laden suitcases past the final barriers. That's when the trap closed. Outside the arrivals area, plainclothes agents stepped forward. Within seconds, uniformed officers surged in. Passengers scattered, unsure what they were witnessing, and there, in the middle of the terminal, 6 suitcases were seized. Every single one was unzipped on the spot. Inside, neat bricks wrapped in plastic glistened under harsh security lights. The total weight, 180 kilograms of Class A narcotics. Street value, up to £14.4 million. The arrests were swift and unflinching. 6 suspects were detained immediately. Kauser herself among them, along with several of her children who had just walked the cases off the belt. Also in custody was a 17-year-old girl whose identity was withheld by the press at the time because of her age. In separate reporting, Safa Noor, confirmed later by prosecutors to be 19 during the offences, was also named among those arrested. Early confusion over ages blurred the distinction, but official records established that Safa was an adult at the time. 2 of Kauser's sons in their 20s were also arrested. Another daughter and one outsider, a man in his 30s not related to the family. That man was Khaled Abdul Kawi, a 36-year-old courier from Halesowen in the West Midlands. Investigators believe he was acting as a pick-up man for another organised crime group, proof that Kauser's pipeline wasn't only feeding her own circle, but supplying other gangs as well. Then came the moment of exposure. The magnitude of the bust was staggering. BBC News splashed headlines the next morning. 6 charged after drugs seized at Birmingham Airport. Prosecutors' photos were striking. Split suitcases and stacked drug bricks like industrial cargo. It was no longer just intelligence, it was evidence laid bare in front of cameras. And yet even in that moment Farzana clung to her mask. Confronted by police, she claimed she was just at the airport to pick up her kids. A concerned mother, nothing more. But as the illegal substances were displayed bag after bag, her words rang hollow. The evidence was literally piled at her feet. Imagine that contradiction. A woman known in her community as a thoughtful, esteemed mother, now surrounded by narcotics worth millions, her own children in handcuffs beside her. It was almost too surreal to believe. As Kauser and her children were led away, the shock spread quickly. News outlets emphasized the same point again and again. A family-run smuggling gang, directed by a mother who had turned her children into couriers. Reporters used words like very normal, masquerade, and loving mum used her own kids to smuggle cocaine. For investigators, the bust was more than just an arrest. It was the unravelling of an entire pipeline. Over the following days and weeks, NCA teams pieced together the bigger picture. 5 separate trips between August and November 2024. Flight and travel records linking Kauser's family to each operation. Phone data and photographs of suitcases were sent ahead of time. International cooperation pointing toward facilitators in Pakistan and insiders in Mexico. The evidence confirmed this was not a one-off. It was the culmination of months of planning, a conveyor belt of narco shipments that had already pumped illegal substances into Britain 4 times before. Why did this bust matter so much? Because in addition to seizing a record quantity in one swoop, the NCA had also cut off a live supply line. If the operation had continued unchecked, Britain's streets could have been flooded with far more. In a public statement, the CPS praised the vigilance and thorough investigation by the NCA that had brought the family's enterprise to an end. They called the bust decisive, an ironclad crime exposed as fragile, and a mother's control replaced by handcuffs and charges. The narcotics mattered, the scale mattered, but the detail that lingered was the image of a mother at the centre of it all, a woman who in public played the role of protector, but in private had pushed her own children into serious organised crime. This was the detail that horrified the press, that gripped the community, and that made the case headline news. Because if a seemingly ordinary mum in Bradford could mastermind an international smuggling pipeline, who else might be hiding behind the mask of normalcy? In one night, the entire family empire crumbled. 6 suitcases, 6 arrests, 180 kilograms of coke were seized. And from that moment forward, there was no turning back. The evidence was undeniable. The operation was exposed, and for Farzana, the devoted mother who had lived a double life, the reckoning had arrived. When the Birmingham sting was over and the suspects were in custody, investigators began to unravel the structure of the organisation. What emerged was a picture that horrified the public. This was not a network of faceless strangers, but a crime group built almost entirely from one family. At the top was Farzana, 54 years old, described by prosecutors as the ringleader of the Bradford-based gang. She was the mastermind who coordinated with contacts abroad, issued instructions, and held the whole operation together. Her children formed the backbone of the conspiracy. The eldest, 33-year-old Junaid Shafak, played his part as a courier and an organiser on the UK side. His younger brother, Mohammed Amir Shafak, 28, was also a courier, making the same drug runs on their mother's orders. Umair Mohammed, only 22, followed the same path, travelling with no baggage before walking out with narco-laden suitcases. Then there was Safa Noor, the only daughter. She was 19 at the time of the conspiracy. Despite her young age, she was drawn into the scheme and expected to handle the same risks as her older brothers. Instead of being shielded by her mother, she was deployed as another courier, expected to handle the same risks as her older brothers. More troubling was the youngest, Hamza Shafak, who was 17 when his mother pushed him into a major courier role. Investigators later stressed how dangerous this was, pointing out that Kauser had exposed her youngest children to life-altering risks. The family web extended further. Sarah Hussein, 27 years old and married into the family, lived on Hollybank Road in Bradford. Though she was not seen lifting coke-laden suitcases, she admitted her involvement in the conspiracy, caught in the orbit of her husband's family. And finally, there was the one outsider, Khaled Abdulkawi, a 36-year-old courier from Hales Owen in the West Midlands. He had no blood ties to Kauser, but he was part of the chain. Abdulkawi's role was to collect some of the coke on behalf of another crime group, showing that Kauser's pipeline did not just serve her household, but was feeding product to other gangs across Britain. 8 people in total. 7 are bound by family and 1 by criminal profit. Together they formed what prosecutors later called predominantly a family affair. That phrase carried weight because it meant the betrayal was not only of the law, but of the deepest human bond. A mother had corrupted her own children, transforming trust into obedience for crime. As one judge remarked in a similar case, as a mother you should have been setting an example for your children, not corrupting them. That line could just as easily have been written for Kauser. Senior NCA officer Rick Mackenzie was even more blunt. She pushed her children into huge danger and has allowed their futures to be effectively destroyed. Instead of protecting her children from harm, Kauser instructed them step by step on how to carry out international narcotics smuggling. She leveraged her authority not to guide them, but to groom them for criminal activity. The result was chilling. A family home turned into the headquarters of an organized crime group, with sons and daughters trained as mules for their own mother's coke trade. It was a grotesque inversion of parenthood, and it made the case unforgettable. When the judge finally handed down the sentences, the weight of justice came crashing down on Farzana and her partners in crime. In total, the family gang received more than 55 years of prison time between them. It was a collective punishment that reflected the massive quantity of controlled substances involved and also the shocking betrayal at the heart of the case. As the ringleader, Farzana herself was given the harshest penalty: 13 years and 4 months behind bars. The message from the court was unambiguous. Being a carefully maintained facade in appearance counted for nothing when, in reality, she had acted as a crime boss. Her eldest son, 33-year-old Junaid Shafak, was sentenced to 10 years and 9 months. Matching him was the only non-family member in the gang, 36-year-old Khaled Abdulkawi from Dudley, who also received 10 years and 9 months. Their sentences underscored the seriousness of their roles as senior couriers and organizers. Farzana's other sons were not spared. 28-year-old Muhammad Amir Shafak was jailed for 8 years and 9 months, while 22-year-old Umair Mohammed received 8 years and 1 month. Then came the only daughter, 19-year-old Safa Noor. She was sentenced to 7 years and 2 months, meaning she will spend the majority of her 20s behind prison walls. Not everyone walked straight into a cell that day. Sarah Hussein, the daughter-in-law, received a 2-year sentence suspended for 2 years. That meant she avoided immediate imprisonment, but remained under strict conditions. Any reoffence would see her locked up. And then there was the youngest, 18-year-old Hamza Shafak. Because he was only 17 at the time of the offences, his case was handled differently. His sentencing was deferred until October 2025, when he would be considered an adult. The court signalled that his youth and the influence of his mother would weigh heavily in deciding his fate. These punishments carried a symbolic weight far beyond the numbers themselves. The court and prosecutors stressed that a parent leading her children into organised crime was a grave aggravating factor. Farzana's choices had sabotaged her own family's future. Instead of pursuing education or careers, her children were now bound for prison. As one NCA officer put it bluntly, she has allowed their futures to be effectively destroyed. The public reaction was fierce. British media quickly dubbed Farzana a real-life crime boss mum. Some outlets went further, comparing her to Griselda Blanco, the infamous Colombian, Bradford's own Griselda Blanco, noting the chilling similarity of a woman at the head of a family-based narco empire. For Bradford, the shock was even closer to home. Neighbours on Waterlily Road, who once thought the Kausers were just another ordinary family, were stunned to learn that behind closed doors an international smuggling operation had been running from their street. Online commentary reflected both outrage and pity. Some sympathised with the children as victims of their mother's greed. Others pointed to the damage this cocaine causes in British communities. Some even speculated why they weren't caught at the start of this criminal journey. One thing was clear. Taking 180 kilos of high-purity coke out of circulation was a major victory. That quantity, once cut and distributed, would have fed addiction, violence and misery across the country. For the police, the case was a reminder of how far organised crime can reach, even into seemingly normal homes. Senior officials emphasised that the work of the NCA and CPS had prevented untold damage and demonstrated that no one, not even a mother in a quiet Yorkshire neighbourhood, is beyond their reach. NCA Branch Commander Mick Pope called it a significant drug seizure which prevented Class A drugs worth many millions of pounds from reaching the hands of criminals in the UK. Today, Farzana Kauser sits in a prison cell, a far cry from the suburban matriarch she once pretended to be. Her story reads like a crime thriller, a trusted mother with a secret role, a global web of contacts, suitcases slipping past borders, and a dramatic sting. But this was no fiction. The price was real. Her family destroyed, reputations shattered, futures stolen, all because one woman decided to trade motherhood for money. The case of Farzana shattered every assumption about what a narco boss looks like. Strip away the clichés of organised crime, the figurehead, the enforcer, and what remained was a mother, a grandmother, someone who could have been living quietly next door. And yet behind that ordinary mask was a woman willing to sacrifice her own children for profit. Her so-called plan collapsed, exposing a life built on lies. The mother who should have protected her family instead destroyed it, leaving her children with criminal records and stolen futures. And that is what makes this story so chilling. If even the role of mum can be corrupted by greed, then how do we ever know who we can trust? How many more ordinary lives hide shadows this dark? Farzana's downfall is a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous criminals are the ones we least expect, and the scariest betrayals are not of strangers, but of family.